Welcome to the first English edition of Hair Talk Vlog. On this edition, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about bangs, as they say in America, fringe, as they say in the UK. That's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about bangs and fringes. Now, 101. So we're going to begin with the history of the bangs. I'm Canadian, so I'm going to use the term the bangs, and I'm going to use a little bit of the term fringe also. So it's fringes and bangs. I'm going to blend it all in because it's all one. So let's talk about the history of it. Okay, so historically, let's go back to, classic, what comes to our mind when we think of, bangs historically. It comes to mind Cleopatra, Egyptian civilization. That's where, boom, that's where it made its mark, Cleopatra. So we saw it then, and we see it in a lot of ancient civilizations. In continuation, we see it back in action, a little bit more mainstream. It became mainstream. It became mainstream. It became mainstream in the Middle Ages. We saw it through all of the Middle Ages. It wasn't just, in fashion for a year or two like fashion is now. In the Middle Ages, things were a little bit slower, a little bit smoother. Things didn't run so quick. So we saw it in the Middle Ages, and then, it disappeared, and disappeared, a good reason, because it was the Elizabethan era. And the Elizabethan era, as we all know, had very, very big foreheads. It was beautiful to have a big forehead. So it had disappeared. We started to see it again back in the late 1800s in a softer form. A little bit more curly, a little bit frizzier up front. But it was more of a hairstyle then. It was more of a hairstyle. It wasn't really like cutting into it. It was more like styling. Styling this fringe or this bang. We saw it there for a bit, but it didn't really become, mainstream. And when we saw it go boom in what we know now, the boom that we know now is the 1920s. Flappers. Revolution. Louise Brooks, with that beautiful bob, see in the picture, great fringe, just boom. Then we see it, Katharine Hepburn, we start seeing it in the 50s. Also, we see it, Betty Page, pinup girls. We see it really strong in the pinup girl movement then, this whole movement then. But it was more of a curved, it was more styled also, it wasn't so cut. Yeah, it was cut, but it was more curved and styled. It wasn't so cut and so geometric as it was with Louise Brooks. So then we see it there. We see it playing a little bit more mainstream. We see it, being part of the pixie with Captain Hepburn. And then we start seeing it mid-60s, late 60s, sexier, softer, more French. Brigitte Bardot. Brigitte brought it in a different form, It was softer. We saw it a lot with, longer hair also. Really beautiful blend that we hadn't seen in the previous versions of the fringe or the bangs in any fashion movement or any civilization. It was much softer. And we saw it continuing into the 70s, until roughly the mid 70s. Then it started, becoming a little bit all-time classic for a certain amount of people back in the 70s. But it disappeared a little bit from the fashion scene, and it came back really strong. It came back in the 90s supermodel era. Supermodels. Linda Evangelista, Naomi Campbell, Christine Turlington, Claudia Schiffer. Claudia had it softer, a little bit more Brigitte Bardot. Linda had the baby bang. It was stronger. Remember those? I remember those baby bangs. When was I born? I was a teenager not in the 60s. I was born in the 60s, late 60s. But I was a teenager in the 80s, and I was a young hairdresser in the 90s. So this is when I first started. I was really strong. It really made an impact in the hairdressing industry and generally in the fashion industry, that whole supermodel, how it really affected the way we saw things, the way we saw ourselves also. It was the first time that really models really made a really, really, really big difference on how people wore their hair, even, in the mainstream. We saw it continuing, Penelope Cruz, I can continue, and I can continue. Different looks, shorter, longer, medium, softer, and it just stayed. It 2021, it's still here. It is stuck in there, and it is always been beautiful part of the puzzle. If you look at hairstyles as a puzzle, a part that you can always change, and it interacts with any hairstyle, any length, any era, any fashion trend, is that piece of the puzzle that we call the fringe or bangs. Now, where we're supposed to do it, where we're not, well, there's some, what should and shouldn't, it's 2021, things are diverse, but let's look at, your basic rule, and I love breaking the rules, but let's talk about the rules. So the basic rule is, first of all, when it comes to, face shapes, how it suits someone, is, we have to measure the width of our forehead, we have to measure the width of our forehead, okay? And then we have to measure the length of our face, right? And, the length of our face must be longer than the width of our forehead, okay? If it's not, and if it's the same, or roughly the same, then probably it's not gonna really suit you, okay? What it does is, if it's not, longer, it tends to, on round faces, make them rounder, square faces, make them square. But like I said, that's when we talk about making things more into harmony. But when we're talking about giving character to people, it's great. If you want to make a face rounder, it's beautiful to make faces rounder as long as people want it and they can, support that look. If you want to make a face square, it's great. But if you want to be, that's more of a character look. It's more edgy. But if you want something to be more within harmony and softer, don't forget, the width. This is, this and this. This has got to be longer. Okay, guys? Now, something else is what we have inside us, our nature and our movements. It's very important because I see a lot of people when they do come in and I cut their hair, and I would see it in the past. I don't see it so much now because I do this test. I'm going to show you guys a really quick test how you can see also what people have inside them, their natural movement, especially if they haven't been your clients for, many years. If they're clients many years, you know what they're going to do automatically. So you don't get these Woody Woodpecker looks, sticking up and people feeling like they're locked up, Much check to see what their natural movements are, And how do you do that? It's very simple. When you're in a salon chair, you get your client to put their hair down, all the hair down. And then afterwards, very important, if they're right-handed, to use their right hand. If they're left-handed, to use their left hand. You tell them to flip their head back. And as soon as they flip their head back, you tell them to make one movement with their hand. And that's how you'll see what's going on. Usually the movement, not always, it's either this or it's either this. Those are the two movements. Like if you see someone doing this, going like this, it's going to be really hard for them to adapt with living with the fringe, because their nature is doing this. If you see someone, though, that myself personally, at least at this time in my life, because that changes, it's not always the same. But at this time in my life, if you do this, the first thing I do is this. So, I'm perfect for a fringe, but I'm leaving it a bit longer now. I'm not going to do these. And the mullet's in fashion now, but it's not for me now at my age. Now, so these basic rules of thumb, Now, beyond that, you got to play around. And like I said, look at it as an important piece of the puzzle that really blends in with a lot of puzzles. Now, on our next episode, we're going to do the how-to, We're going to talk on how to do partings and what techniques we can use to create all these different fringes and bangs, More textured bangs, softer bangs, heavier bangs, more flowing bangs. Where we're going to have to take the sections and why to get the right look. That's what we're going to do on the next episode of Hair Talk Vlog. Catch you guys then. Keep on cutting the free mind.